Before we get into the intro today, I have to tell you guys about this awesome chance to save some money on the upcoming Pacific Bitcoin Festival happening on October 5th and 6th out in Los Angeles. If you click the link below in the show notes, you get a 21% discount on the event tickets. And the best part is you don't even have to worry about remembering a promo code because the link will automatically apply the discount at checkout. Guys, I have to say that honestly, this might be one of the better events to be going to this year, because not only will you be surrounded people like Lynn Alden, Greg Foss, Preston Pish, etc., but this one is actually one of those affordable events in the space that you can go to where it's not going to cost you thousands of dollars just to get a ticket like some of the other Bitcoin events. So go and click the link below, get your tickets to Pacific Bitcoin, and when you do, please reach out to me. I'd love to hang out with you guys in person. I'd love to get a real-life happy hour set up to chat and hang out with you guys more. So I hope that I can see you guys there. Hey everyone, welcome to this week's release of the Hashrate Happy Hour Podcast. On today's show, I'm joined by Elliot David, the head of climate strategy at Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol. Elliot and I have a wide-ranging discussion on all things climate, and we do a full deep dive on who Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol is and how their token works to help incentivize the build-out of sustainable Bitcoin mining operations. Whether you are a big climate activist or not, this is an absolutely fantastic conversation with Elliot, and he does a masterful job explaining how he sees Bitcoin mining playing an integral role in the build-out of electrical infrastructure in emerging markets. Today's podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, the Texas Blockchain Council, a Bitcoin-first nonprofit industry organization working to make Texas the jurisdiction of choice for Bitcoin mining and blockchain innovation. They will be hosting North America's premier policy conference for Bitcoin and the digital asset ecosystem on November 15th through the 17th in Fort Worth, Texas. For more information, please visit their website at texasblockchaincouncil.org. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. Like I said in the introduction, I'm here with Elliot David at Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol. Elliot, welcome to the show, my man.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Ben.
I am very excited to dig into this conversation. You guys, you're not as well known, and I'd love to dig into just kind of everything Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol, how you guys are doing it, what you guys are doing, and really dive into that. So I appreciate the time, Elliot. I always like to kind of kick these episodes off with, I love hearing people's backgrounds. I love hearing what you were doing before Bitcoin mining and then what led you to this crazy ecosystem and industry. So please walk us through your background and how it got you to here.
Sure. Yeah, I guess I had a pretty, jungle gym style pathway that brought me to Bitcoin. But born and raised in New York, grew up there, hadn't really, interacted with Bitcoin in a meaningful way for most of my professional career. But yeah, I guess starting from the beginning, spent some time in the military before university. Came back to New York. Was a student at Hunter College, where I originally was studying astrophysics and cosmology, but then, in the meanwhile, was really interested in sustainability, environmentalism. So I would, volunteer, take internships, take roles at various organizations, doing everything from creating green spaces and parks to, trash pickup to, MSW management. And that included work in energy policy. I would say that I became, very specifically focused on energy and energy poverty, energy economics in 2017. I would say that's when my focus kind of narrowed. That was when Hurricane Maria hit Puerto Rico. Hurricanes Irma and Maria hit Puerto Rico in 2017. For your viewers who aren't familiar, basically it was a devastating, extreme weather event. It completely knocked out the utility, the energy grid in Puerto Rico. Tragically, dozens of people died directly as a result of the hurricane. And what most people don't realize is that thousands of people died after the hurricane because they didn't have access to electricity. This was because of medicine, water filtration, even domestic violence. All these things are associated with energy poverty. And, the hurricane killed people not just because of the extreme winds and water, but actually because of its impact on the grid. Once that happened, I went to go work for the Department of Energy here in the U.S. This was during the Rick Perry administration, working for President Trump. I was doing a little bit of research there on how do you rebuild the Puerto Rican grid. But, while I was at DOE, I would say that the office I was working in wasn't particularly focused on Puerto Rico. And so right after that, I went to go work for President Clinton at the Clinton Foundation. So interestingly, I'm probably one of the youngest people who's worked for both, the Trumps and the Clintons, who, by the way, take pretty divergent views on energy policy.
Oh, really?
Anyway, I moved over to the Clinton Foundation. I was working on their Islands Energy Program, and they had a whole initiative focused on solarizing small island developing states, basically building out clean energy infrastructure for island nations, island countries. And in particular, they were really keen on how do you rebuild the Puerto Rican grid. In that role, I started to understand, what is energy poverty, why it exists. And to make a long story short, one of the big challenges for, clean energy development in Puerto Rico, and I'll get into this into more detail later.
Yeah.
Is that they just don't have flexible buyers of power. It's the economics of renewable energy in Puerto Rico is really difficult. And so, worked on some microfinancing solutions. The foundation was raising money to build, microgrid solar with batteries, which, was helpful, but, didn't exactly scale. After that, graduated, I actually moved to China, where I was a Schwarzman Scholar at Tsinghua University. While I was there, I studied clean energy transition, energy policy under David Sandalow, who's, former Obama, Clinton, sort of climate advisor at the White House, really respected and esteemed energy expert. And it was around then I started to learn about digital assets, blockchain, more from an accounting perspective. That obviously brought me to Bitcoin mining. And, before I started to learn about, freedom money and, permissionless monetary system,
Mm-hmm.
I basically was presented Bitcoin to Bitcoin as these are machines that monetize electricity into a globally liquid currency in a way that's completely interruptible, completely location agnostic, completely flexible.
That was how you were introduced to Bitcoin.
I would say that's how I was introduced to Bitcoin mining.
Okay. Okay.
But that's what brought me into the space. Like as soon as I heard that, everything clicked, and I've been working on Bitcoin and sustainability ever since. And I was kind of hired as the first employee at Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol, and it's been a wild ride ever since.
Thank you for that. You have a much more colored history than I do, so I appreciate that a lot. And I've got a lot of things to actually circle back on. You said it just clicked. You heard, what Bitcoin mining was, and it clicked for you. Maybe go a little bit more on that. Like why did it click?
Sure. And up until this point, I'd heard of Bitcoin just as, generically cryptocurrency, anonymous payment system. My first interaction with Bitcoin was actually back in 2010. I had some friends that all wanted to go in $100 each to buy 100 Bitcoin. I sadly did not. Everybody has one of those. I should have bought Bitcoin stories. So it's no Bitcoin socks or anything like that, but certainly I regret that. And then later on, after the military, I was doing some international security work. Again, was exposed to Bitcoin as just basically this like illicit finance network. Didn't really get to dive into it. And then interestingly, while I was an undergrad, I actually took a course with General David Petraeus, who's the former CIA director, and every week I had to basically present to him on cybersecurity, cyber terrorism issues. And every once in a while, an article would pop up. Somebody demanded ransom in Bitcoin, or
sure.
Bitcoin was used in some illicit finance scheme.
Because they never did that with cash, right? Like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think similar to the internet, the early days of the internet, there wasn't any nuance. People tend to fear what they don't understand.
That's right.
As I'm sure you've seen in your conversations. But then circling back to, present day, a couple of years ago when Bitcoin mining clicked. And again, this is, not considering all the important, social value that Bitcoin brings to the world, just purely from an energy perspective. The ability to monetize electricity and create this very unique load is revolutionary. When I was at the Clinton Foundation, I started to dive deeper into why Puerto Rico was having such a difficult time building out renewables, and to sort of throw a couple of numbers out there. This was 2017. This was nearly 6 years ago. The Puerto Rican grid mix was, I think, 99.9% fossil fuels. Pretty much all of which were imported. The renewable penetration was 0.1%. And this is despite the fact that Puerto Rico has abundant sun, wind, and water resources. Now, at the same time, Puerto Ricans were also paying, at that time, 27 cents a kilowatt hour on average for electricity.
Oof.
For us in the US, I mean, that's like
unthinkable. Yeah.
That's between 2 and 3 times how much we pay, plus the fact that they have to import nearly all of their energy through fossil fuels. It means that whenever there was a spike in fossil fuel prices, the price of electricity jacked up as well. I think there were several times over the last couple of years where Puerto Ricans were paying more for electricity than anywhere else in the United States, with the exception of Hawaii.
Wow.
And if you look at the actual spot price for renewable electricity in Puerto Rico, it's much lower than fossil fuels. So, the first question I asked while I was at the foundation was, why the hell aren't we building out more renewables in Puerto Rico? Like, is it political? Is it, is it a policy problem? And that's when I learned about, curtailment and the need to balance supply and demand on the grid. And if you have the option to build, say, a solar farm in Puerto Rico or in Florida, you're going to build it in Florida because you're going to sell every kilowatt. So as soon as, somebody explained to me what Bitcoin mining is, I was like, this is going to change everything.
And maybe more specifically, that was because in Puerto Rico, they would have to build excess capacity, and then there wouldn't be anyone to take that, and that would be. Oh, I suppose then there's also the intermittency part and component to it as well. Was that a factor of that? Like, it's tough to have that at night then?
Essentially, like, you couldn't have, I mean, to say you can have a completely renewable grid is tough, but to have almost no renewables, a big component of this was just flexible demand. You didn't have a reliable buyer of power. There's also certainly, policy challenges with PREPA and LUMA, which, is the island's utility, but to have 0.1% penetration, I mean, that's lower than I would imagine it's lower than any other state in the country.
Yeah,
right?
I would imagine.
And today, I think that penetration for capacity is somewhere around like 2 or 3%. So tens of billions of dollars later, all this attention paid to rebuilding the Puerto Rican grid, and still today, we just don't have that renewable capacity built out, even though it's way more reliable and resilient for a small island developing state, and obviously more affordable.
Are they using coal? Is that the fuel source that they were importing in?
So in 2017,
or is it liquid?
I think it was, it was mostly imported diesel. I think today it's like, and somebody should fact check me on this, but it's some mix of coal, nat gas, and and petroleum. And that still makes up like 96%, 97% of the power on the island. And you could, in theory, bring out batteries, but you also have to remember that Puerto Ricans are not just facing energy poverty, but fuel poverty, right? They can't afford a, four or 8,000 kilowatt or four or $8,000 PV system on their home, and then on top of that, building out a $10,000 battery pack, right, when the average household income was something like $16,000. Like, it's just not feasible.
Yeah.
But Bitcoin mining, obviously, can change that.
So and that's where I'd love to maybe take the direction of this conversation is walk me through how that comes in and solves it. Like, what's that look like?
So today, as far as I understand, there's not that much mining in Puerto Rico, right? You still have capacity problems, transmission problems, but Bitcoin mining, and we tend to deify it and say that Bitcoin solves everything, but talking about purely in the context of energy,
yeah,
Bitcoin mining is a interruptible, insanely flexible, totally location agnostic load that turns electricity, no matter where it comes from, whether it's coal or solar or anything, into this globally liquid currency in a way that's reliable and predictable. Now, that statement alone is what we should be selling to people in the energy space, because you could judge Bitcoin on the merits of permissionless money and state control of currency, and you can have all these very important debates about the role of money, but to have this, not a battery, but to have like an arbitrator for the transmission of the value of electricity across space and time is transformative. In Puerto Rico, I would say we're not quite there yet, though we are talking to miners that are interested in using Bitcoin mining to basically fix the grid. But as you've seen in other places, right around the United States, around the world, Bitcoin mining is already solving this problem. You have miners like Gridless in Africa, or you have miners like CleanSpark in Georgia that are basically, accelerating the clean energy transition through Bitcoin mining.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you don't mind, I'd actually like to just keep going even just a little bit deeper, because I think you and I and probably everyone on Bitcoin Twitter in our nice little echo chamber, that statement about Bitcoin mining, it's like, well, duh. But I think there still is, just a little bit that's like, well, help me understand how Bitcoin mining comes in and helps the Puerto Rican grid with the renewable energy. I mean, does that look like just this combo mix of natural gas generation, solar generation, Bitcoin mining to help smooth out peaks? Like, maybe just go one deeper for maybe the people that aren't as plugged into like how Bitcoin mining is solving this.
Sure, and I guess maybe to even take a step back further, not all Bitcoin mining is the same, and it doesn't all have the same environmental or energy impact.
Mm-hmm.
The same way that you can't look to one example of fossil-based Bitcoin mining and attribute it to the whole ecosystem, you can't do the inverse as well. Again, purely from an energy technology perspective, Bitcoin mining is effectively a new and better type of data center that has one specific function. So you can have a data center that is working well with the local community, that is, participating in demand response, that is, being a good steward and creating a good tax base for the geographies in which they operate. And you can have a Bitcoin miner that's not, right. Most Bitcoin mining is done as a business.
Yep.
You can have a miner come in and create noise or, pollute a local environment. And I'm not saying that any one miner is doing this, but it really just depends on the case by case. But to answer your question about like this next level, how do we actually get to the point where Bitcoin mining is I wouldn't say exclusively, but um, heavily mobilized to solve this energy problem. Uh, I think this is going to be the natural consequence of halvings and hash price sort of going down over time. Um, I don't think nobody can predict the price of Bitcoin, but I don't think it's realistic to assume that the price of Bitcoin is going to double every 4 years, right? And that's going to perfectly, meet, with liquidity and everything else. Like, I don't think it's going to meet sort of that
Sure.
same trend in the network. What this means is for Bitcoin miners, where between 60 to 80% or whatever of your cost is electricity, you're going to increasingly have to move towards lower and lower cost power.
Yep.
That means you're going to have to increasingly move towards, stranded, negatively priced, or non-competitive power. Unless you're, like a TeraWulf that can snag a 2 cents, 2 cents kilowatt hour, agreement. That means that Bitcoin miners are naturally going to have lower uptimes, right, over time. And I know that Zach from CleanSpark, kind of said something similar on the previous episode.
Yeah. Which was a super interesting take. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I completely agree. And, Zach and CleanSpark, they're actually one of our earliest and, stalwart partners. Big fans of the work that they're doing. But I think over time, Bitcoin miners are going to naturally transition into this like energy arbitrator, energy tool. And I don't know if we're going to see the end of industrial scale mining, but certainly it won't be like the same traditional data center model. Now, where I think this bridges to the conversation we're having about Puerto Rico, and this is my crazy, tinfoil hat thesis that I've been ranting about ever since I learned about Bitcoin mining. Ever since 2020, I've been saying that by 2025, a quarter of all hash rate is going to be in emerging markets. And people would laugh at me. I think today, maybe they're not quite as skeptical. The reason why I think hash rate is going to move into emerging markets is to solve this, energy poverty problem. Bitcoin miners are naturally going to go and build out in the places where you have the most energy potential, and the most inflexible demand. And if you think about where are the sunniest and windiest and wettest places in the world, Latin and South America, Sub-Saharan Africa, South and Southeast Asia. So I don't think we're obviously there yet, but my hope is that Bitcoin mining can actually solve this massively, this global problem of energy poverty for over 1 billion people.
Yeah, it's. I couldn't agree with you more. I had John Belizaire with Saluna on, and I mean he said all the same things. I mean, and the way that they're viewing projects is all of these stranded energy pockets, with the potential for future build out that's going to support societies and civilians. So I appreciate you going deep on that one, Elliot. That it's something that. I mean, I started the podcast because I wanted to talk to people who are watching where the puck is going to be going in the Bitcoin mining space and the energy space. So I appreciate that. I don't want to glaze over the sustainable Bitcoin protocol. So let's maybe kind of do a little pivot here and let's talk about your current role, who SBP is, and
it's a terrible name.
No. It's just have to get the acronym down. So I'd love to go deep on that next.
Sure. Happy to kind of talk a bit about the inception of SBP. What are we setting out to solve? I will say it really is a terrible acronym. I mean, when Silicon Valley Bank, went down, I had all my relatives reaching out to me. Elliot, are you okay? Or are you out of a job? Or when like SBF,
Oh,
command people
yeah.
were reaching out like, oh, I heard SBF, like, are you okay? Um, anyway, we're not great at naming things, but we've built a really cool solution, a really great team, solving what we think is a big problem. So the kind of background, the inception story of SVP is several years ago, our co-founders were thinking about Bitcoin mining, energy consumption in the context of institutional adoption. Um, working early with, Jihan Wu, founder of Bitmain Bitdeer, and, he's sort of an early thought partner in this. Um, but wondering, whether or not Bitcoin's energy consumption will prove to be an obstacle for institutional adoption. And this was before Elon tweeted and, everybody went crazy, before the China ban. We were thinking institutional investors are going to need a solution to hold Bitcoin in a verifiably sustainable way, but without compromising the fungibility of Bitcoin. So, once Elon tweeted, you had people like Kevin O'Leary coming out and saying, "Oh, I'll just have a green coin and a non-green coin."
Yeah.
And there's some really great threads. There's actually a really great thread by Amanda Fabiano from Galaxy explaining why bifurcating Bitcoin is just a disaster. So again, we wanted to create this solution that would enable an investor, say a BlackRock, to hold Bitcoin in a verifiably sustainable way, while at the same time creating a market-based incentive that rewards Bitcoin miners for using verified clean energy sources. So in addition to not just putting a Band-Aid on, what is perceived to be a big problem, but actually how can you leverage Bitcoin mining and its unique attributes to actually, radically accelerate decarbonization, to mobilize capital into clean energy. And the way we do that is we've created a separate instrument called the SBC, or Sustainable Bitcoin Certificate. And the way it works is a Bitcoin miner would go through a third-party audit, basically verifying, that they are actually using clean energy. We don't believe in just trusting. Don't just trust, verify. Once a Bitcoin miner has demonstrated they're using clean energy, we then issue them this instrument for each Bitcoin that they mine. Basically, this is a way for them to monetize their clean energy procurement, because they can then sell this onto, BlackRock or Goldman or Fidelity, or the 43 trillion of ESG capital that's waiting on the sidelines to be deployed into Bitcoin. So you have this double solution of both incentivizing miners, bringing an additional 4 to 7% of revenue to their bottom lines, but then also bringing a lot more of this institutional capital into Bitcoin. And then just in terms of my role, real quick, we're an early stage, startup. My official title is I'm the head of our climate strategy and partnerships, which is a nebulous way of saying that I do a little bit of everything.
You do everything. That's right.
Yeah. So I'm the point of contact with all of our Bitcoin mining partners. Today, we have signed agreements with about 13 to 15% of global hash rate, depending on the day. I also do all of our engagement, with policymakers, both at this, state and federal level, and international level. I engage with environmental nonprofits, academic institutions. I do our HR. So a little bit of everything.
Sure. Oh yeah. That's, startup world. That's, I left 3M and jumped into the startup world. So I hear you. I think this next question is probably a byproduct of me not really understanding like tokenization and things like that. Is SBC, is it a token that you guys created and then it's issued? So again, this is probably just a byproduct of me not knowing all of this that well. So let's just say Bitcoin miner A verifies through your third-party audit that they are using renewable energy. Do carbon credits or anything like, do credits count towards that?
So carbon credits and RECs, or other renewable energy or energy-based environmental commodities, are very different. You can think of the SBC as an environmental commodity derived from Bitcoin, almost like a clean energy derivative of Bitcoin mining. So no interaction with carbon credits.
Okay.
But RECs are the instrument used to basically determine that a megawatt hour has an environmental attribute associated with it.
Okay. Got it. And then
it's not a REC in itself, but let's say you're a miner that's buying clean energy. This is a way to monetize that in the same way that, the EAC market does it.
Okay, I got it. So then is Bitcoin miner A, then they are sending they're giving you Bitcoin in exchange for the SBC,
No.
or it's just, hey, you generated a Bitcoin, and so now here is your SBC token.
Exactly. It's the latter, not the former.
Okay.
So we don't interact at all with the Bitcoin network. I mean, we are planning to build on Bitcoin because, we're a team of Bitcoiners. Philosophically, we believe in Bitcoin. But it's a totally separate. You could think the same way that RECs or EACs more broadly are the environmental attributes of energy, and SBC is like the environmental attribute of Bitcoin. So, one of the challenges with electricity or with, clean energy claims more broadly is that as soon as electricity enters the grid, it is fully fungible. The electrons that are powering our computers, I have no idea whether they were powered by coal, gas, nuclear, hydro, solar, hamsters running on a wheel. Like, it's impossible to trace an individual electron. So the reason why the EAC market exists and why you have what's called market-based accounting, which is what the greenhouse gas protocol uses to basically account for clean energy consumption, is to be able to attribute like who is using what power. Because what's nice about energy as opposed to carbon is energy is finite. It's physically limited. Every kilowatt hour of clean electricity that is produced has to be consumed. And so you can attribute for that consumption. Whereas with carbon, and this is the reason why we don't really deal in the carbon market, is, even though it's also a digital asset, it doesn't fall under market-based accounting. Like, you can't, I in theory could create a carbon credit for some activity, but there's no irrefutable proof that this activity is like taking place. So Bitcoin is effectively energy and computation, right? It's like the simplest, supply chain ever. It's literally just code and energy.
Yep.
And so what you can do is, by verifying that clean energy is being used, you can then attribute that a Bitcoin doesn't have to be tied to any one Bitcoin, but a Bitcoin was mined using clean energy. And then because the SBC is a totally independent asset of, the BTC, of the Bitcoin, they can be bought and sold independently. So essentially what we're doing is creating a way for institutional investors to basically pay Bitcoin miners to use clean energy.
Yeah, I really like that. And I super appreciate the walk through how the credits work, because I was a little fuzzy on it, and I'm sure there are others who may not have had that type of an understanding of it. So that's super interesting. Then, as far as like, you guys are giving the Bitcoin miners a way to prove even one step further that their energy source, their fuel source is renewable or clean.
Yeah. And then what's important about that is, as Bitcoiners, we often talk about proof of work, and we're making all these claims around energy consumption, but there's a reason why the estimations for the sustainability of the Bitcoin network range like crazy. It's because we don't have the data and transparency to actually prove that Bitcoin is a sustainable asset class. And the way that we've designed our protocol, and we can get into the nitty-gritty on this, but as SBP scales, the Bitcoin network will not just become 100% renewable, but will actually be, over time, responsible for more clean energy financing than the entire network could have ever consumed in its history. So we are actually driving climate positivity of the Bitcoin network, not just carbon neutrality.
Yeah, so I am curious, when you look at like the energy mix for the United States, and you kind of touched on it with like your statement about Puerto Rico, it's not super feasible to assume that the entire grid system will be renewable energy. It's just that, there's a lot of intermittency there. What are your thoughts about like nuclear baseload generation or, gas peaker plants in the generation stack plus renewable plus wind, wind, solar, hydro, as far as like your protocol, and then like, because Bitcoin miners do also help drive, the generation of nuclear, and just some of the other types of generation. What do you think about that? How do you think about that?
Sure. Well, first of all, I mean, we consider hydro and nuclear both to be clean energy sources, and I personally am a huge fan of nuclear. Elliot David, not SBP, but Elliot David wants an 80% nuclear grid as opposed to a 20% nuclear grid. Right. So I am super bullish on nuclear. And I actually think there's a lot of really interesting, sort of public facing similarities of Bitcoin and nuclear energy, and sort of the, kind of FUD around, both those, technologies. So that's sort of, broadly speaking, nuclear and hydro are both considered clean energy sources. We're also not out to punish any one type of generation over another, right? Like at the end of the day, what we're really doing is we are pricing in the environmental benefits of sustainable Bitcoin mining and then letting the market do what it wants. So if you are, a miner that is using, and I should also mention that waste methane gas is also a huge component of this, because that is, we can get into the whole methane conversation.
That might be a whole nother podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, we gotta, next time I'll bring Chase and the Crusoe team, and, we can, or Giga Energy, or one of
both,
our, methane
separately, but both. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's so many cool applications for this. I mean, the whole methane conversation is fascinating. But essentially what we're doing is we're pricing in that environmental benefit. Like, that is it in a nutshell. So if you are, a fossil-based miner, Elliot David, am personally not a fan of that. I would like to see 100% clean energy grid. I recognize that there's an orderly transition that needs to happen. I am a climate activist, and I think we got to decarbonize as fast as possible. I was just talking to a friend of mine this morning who's like a climate refugee from the Philippines, and his whole village was basically decimated from, as a result of climate change. Plus I live in Florida now, so I have to care even more. But yeah, no, at the end of the day, it's an incentive. We believe that markets can solve this problem. So we're just creating a market for it.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And it's hugely needed. I think the more incentives we can have, it's a lot of buzzword or clickbaity type thing, to talk about Bitcoin mining only using renewable energy. But when you look at it, that type of an incentive and that type of like generation is it's where everything's going anyways. And so if we can tie in, Bitcoin mining to that, it's even more powerful. I want to bring you, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping all over in the conversation. You had mentioned,
no, please,
that you think a quarter of the hash rate. Well, it kind of ties in. I'll try to tie this in. You'd mentioned that a quarter or more of the global hash rate is going to start to come from, I think you said third world countries, emerging markets,
global south, developing economies.
Let's maybe touch on that just a little bit more, because I think it ties into what we're talking about right now, which is they're going to need electrical generation built out. And it's, like you said, these areas are primed for wind. Again, I talked to John Belazaire, and their first project was in Morocco. And he said that the wind farm that they plugged into had like a 75-80% load factor at a wind farm,
Wow.
which was like,
That's crazy.
that's crazy. I mean, it's mind-bogglingly high uptime. So it's, maybe just touch on that statement a little bit more, because I'm super curious about that.
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of variables at play. One is the renewable energy potential, right? As I said before, the sunniest, the windiest, and the wettest places are all in the global south. Historically, though, these are also all the locales that have the highest electricity prices, the lowest renewable energy penetration. And this is despite the fact that most of the materials that we use to produce clean energy come from these countries. So we basically go out, we go to, what is it, Peru or sub-Saharan Africa. We basically pull out minerals or materials, build out clean energy infrastructure, and then throw it in West Texas. Now, the fact that all of this clean energy potential is so abundant in the emerging markets, but it's untapped. It's both a terrible problem, but also an incredible opportunity. If you look at some countries, right, like Ethiopia or Kenya, or like, take East Africa, for example, there is something like, 1,000 gigawatts of, wind potential that is either curtailed or like untapped.
Wow.
Right. And you have over 1 billion people, I think it's like 1.1 billion people who do not have access to clean or reliable electricity around the world. In America, we often complain about fuel poverty. That is, difficulty paying for electricity.
Mm-hmm.
But there's, 1 in 7 people on this planet don't have a light switch to turn on. And if you think about it, also, energy is truly the golden thread of sustainable development, right? You can't have any other types of enabling infrastructure without electricity.
Yeah.
You can't have water, you can't have medicine, education, institutions. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals, but you really need SDG 7, which is energy access, in order to achieve all the other goals of sustainable development. Yeah. And so, why Bitcoin? Like, what the hell does Bitcoin have to do with any of this? There is this model called the Anchor Business Community Model of rural energy development, which has been around for a while. It's basically this idea that you have stranded communities that have this energy potential, but cannot access it because you don't have some kind of reliable buyer of power. So it makes it uneconomical or technically infeasible. And the idea behind this ABC model, the Anchor Business Community Model, is that you might have a business or a factory or some kind of reliable load that comes in, basically connects to a stranded power source, to a stranded community, and then you can use that to essentially finance the build out, electrify communities, and alleviate energy poverty. And this has knock-on effects, on financial inclusion, digital inclusion, which I'll get to in a moment.
Yeah.
But up until now, this model theoretically was really powerful, but practically is very difficult to achieve. Until now.
Yeah.
So you're probably familiar with gridless.
Yep.
Which is,
and if Gridless is by chance listening at all, I would love to get somebody from Gridless on the show.
Let's message Eric, okay. Phil, Janet. Let's message them like right after this. Right. If I wasn't doing what I'm doing now, I would be doing Gridless. Like when I was saying a couple of years ago that all this hash rate is going to move into emerging markets, I was like, somebody should do this, and Gridless is doing it.
Yeah.
And they are just awesome. I am a huge fan. And what they're doing is they're essentially applying this ABC model in a successful way. Now, I also want to let me touch on one other piece of this as well, which is that we often talk about Bitcoin as this massively powerful financial inclusion technology.
Yes.
Bitcoin is freedom money. It's permissionless. Anybody in the world can access it. That's not true. There are 3 billion people on planet Earth today who don't have internet access. Bitcoin is internet money, right? It's like you need this other type of infrastructure in order to be able to access it as well. If we went to a Bitcoin standard tomorrow, that's 1 in 3 people, almost more than 1 in 3 people on planet Earth won't be able to participate. And you need, I guess Starlink is maybe an exception, but you really need energy in order to build out internet infrastructure.
Yeah, because how are you going to have internet without electricity? Yeah.
Exactly. So you really need these two, what I call enabling infrastructures, to work together. And so what I think is, like, you not only can electrify these communities across sub-Saharan Africa and the global south, but you can also tie in this internet inclusion piece as well. Now, I want to take a step back because I want to caution any Bitcoin miners that are hearing this and saying, wow, there's, terawatts of untapped power across Africa that I can go and gobble up. What I think is going to be one of the most important questions in the coming years as hash rate naturally migrates to the global south is, how do you interact with the local community? I think, before miners can move out of the US, or, before they move into these markets, they have to think about, how do I be a good steward? How do I make sure I'm actually solving the problems on the ground for people, that I'm not making their lives worse? Because it's very easy to come in and be, a taker and not a giver.
Yep.
There are certainly miners that are, doing this right. Like, again, I'm a huge fan of CleanSpark. They do an awesome job. I know that the DPO team was on your, show. They're also partners of ours, and the way they work with the utility is amazing. There's another miner called Penguin Digital in Paraguay that's like supporting local communities and training young people, in different technologies. Like, I think we have to first perfect this social element of Bitcoin mining and how it interacts with the community.
Yeah.
And then let's go and, save the world.
I'm a big proponent of Bitcoin needs to come in as a tool. And I think my audience is probably sick of hearing this, but there was a project that I tried to start up here in Minnesota, and my approach to it was so focused on how do I get the lowest power cost possible. And that was all I was focused on, where now, especially on this podcast and the awesome guests like yourself that I get to talk to, is I'm realizing that you really need to have a much broader and bigger understanding of how you can be a tool for either the community or the utility provider. Big learnings from you, but what you're saying is spot on. I think you need to have people with the right motives to go in and do those types of projects.
Yeah, I think we're getting there. There's nothing that people care more about than their own problems. That applies both in life and in business. And the miners that are the most successful, right? They're not an island, right? Miners are not islands. They naturally have to interact with energy, internet, political infrastructures. Like, the ones that do that the best are the ones that are going to succeed.
Yeah, completely agree. So just to keep a tab on the time, Elliot, I've already got a note down. We are going to have to circle back for a round 2 podcast, because we didn't get into methane mitigation. We didn't get into a couple other things that I really wanted to go deep on with you. So
Chinese mining,
right? All that fun stuff. Yeah, I mean, we didn't even get to you studying energy in China. Like, I wanted to go there too. So we have a follow-up episode. I did want to get one last question from you. I'd love your perspective on how you view the future of energy Bitcoin mining. Like, if you're flying over the world in a jet, what does the energy mix look like for you?
Wow. I mean, that's a $1 trillion question, if there ever was one. If I could answer that question, I would probably I'd be getting paid a bit more, probably. But no, in terms of the energy mix of the future, I mean, again, I don't think it's realistic to expect that we're going to have, an immediate decarbonization. I don't think we're going to get to net zero tomorrow. There are a lot of major challenges in our path, and as somebody who's worked in the climate tech space for coming on 10 years, it's very easy to get disheartened, disillusioned. I mean, we're literally in the hottest year on record.
Yep.
And it's only going to get hotter. But I think that we're starting to align we're starting to correct for the real problems in the energy transition. I held a conference. In addition to Bitcoin, I'm also really interested in helping young people find green jobs. And we organized this really fantastic climate jobs conference for CUNY, which was my undergrad, which has about 500,000, mostly working class, first generation American college students. And one of the speakers said something that I think about often. He was the head of the UN environmental program, and he made the point that the world's pension funds have something like $40 trillion under management. We've had the technology to solve climate change for decades, and we also know that it's an existential problem. We know that it's life and death. I mean, Puerto Rico is a perfect example.
Yeah.
And so it's not a problem of technology. It's not a problem of money. It's a people problem, right? It's like, how do we fix the economics? How do we fix the politics? How do we fix the social nuances of this stuff? And this might be a very turnaround way of answering your question. But I think we're getting there. I think we are almost at the point where we're starting to reorient socially around solving this problem. And the energy mix of the future, I mean, I'm hoping that we have a lot more nuclear, a lot more low carbon resources. I am also a student of carbon management. And so I think naturally we're going to need a lot of DAC and CCUS and and then as a one last note on the whole sort of Bitcoin mining and emerging markets piece is when you increase energy access, it actually decarbonizes across the board. Because it makes communities and individuals more efficient in their work.
Interesting.
Helps them live longer. It helps them get more educated. Yeah. It actually reduces birth rates. It reduces gender-based violence. I mean, this problem of energy, internet, and money, when we solve it, I think we'll have unlocked the next phase of sustainable development.
I'm pretty excited for that to happen because I absolutely think we're marching quickly into that direction as well. Well, Elliot, this has been fantastic. Again, we certainly have a follow-up episode to record.
Yeah.
I'd love for you to give a handoff for the audience so that they can get in touch with you. How can they find Sustainable Bitcoin Protocol? Please tell the audience how they can get in touch with you guys.
Sure. Find me on, LinkedIn or Twitter. I think my Twitter handle is really boring. It's like Elliot J. David or something like that. I have a lot of Twitter handle envy of, some of the folks in the space like hash override or, Cully Kavnis, who's the co-founder of Crusoe. His is like, what is it? Digital Cowboy or something? Combustion Cowboy, something cool like that. Anyway, so I'm Elliot David on Elliot J. David on Twitter, LinkedIn. Check out our website. It's sustainablebtc.org. You can also find us on LinkedIn and Twitter at sustainablebtc. We're pretty active. Have some pretty exciting announcements in the coming weeks and months. And if you're a miner or an investor that's interested in Bitcoin and sustainability, don't hesitate to reach out.
Oh, thank you. We'll link to everything in the show notes, Elliot. Thank you again. This was an absolute blast, and you take care.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.